Thank you, everybody. Thank you to Glenn and Laura and Calopia for putting this on. As already stated, I'm Rob O'Day from the Living Oceans Society. I got involved with Living Oceans a little over a year ago. I had spent 27 years working for a company that developed social housing, co-op housing, any sort of housing for low-income British Columbians, and thought, I got 5 or 10 years left before I retire. Time for something new. The social housing work was my first job out of university. So after 27 years, I quit and started working with Living Oceans. So who is Living Oceans? We are a nonprofit society based here in Vancouver that does all kinds of work to do with healthy, sustainable oceans. So we have been interveners in the pipeline projects, tankers. We work on sustainable fisheries. We do a lot of scientific studies, ocean mapping, work with climate change, ocean acidification. But today I'm here to talk about our Clear the Coast program, which is about removing marine debris from our shorelines here in BC. What is marine debris? Well, there's derelict vessels, there's ghost fishing gear, there's shoreline and beaches, it's just any sort of man-made product that gets deposited on the beach, most of it being plastic and styrofoam. What's the problem with marine debris? Animals eat it. I haven't included the obligatory photos of dead birds with stomachs full of plastic or whales that are tangled up in fishing nets, but those are very real issues with marine debris. In the neighborhood of 1 million seabirds a year, 100,000 marine mammals. So it's not just that 1 or 2 odd whales or sea lion, but ingestion, entanglement, bioaccumulation of the toxins in plastic up the food chain, and the toxicity as a result. Contamination of our seafood has now been proven. There was a recent study where UBC went around and collected samples of seafood in our grocery stores, and the nanoplastics, which are, the natural process of plastic doesn't go away, it just breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. It's now down into small enough pieces that it's getting absorbed into the flesh of our food. So getting it out of the habitats is really important. Lots of people have heard about Garbage Island. It's not an actual island, it's just dense plastics floating in the ocean. But you can see 2 of the gyres there. There's 5 gyres worldwide. And that sort of shows where the main plastic accumulation is in the North Pacific Ocean. The United Nations Environmental Program estimates that 8.8 million tons of plastic goes into the ocean every year. A tremendous amount of plastic out there in the oceans, and like I said, it's getting into our food supply. Living Oceans, we do our cleanups in a very specific area. We're on the north coast of Vancouver Island, so this doesn't really show the scale, but up there is the upper left corner is Cape Scott, and we clean about 100 kilometers of BC coastline from the North Coast Trail and Cape Scott down to the opening of Quatsino Sound. And we've been doing that cleanup for 3 years now. This year will be our 4th year. The coastline that we're talking about is very remote. It takes 8 hours to get in there by boat. It would take about 8 hours to hike from the nearest road. The shorelines are covered with reefs. That's my 4 minutes. I'm going to have to move a whole lot quicker. So the logistics, to do a cleanup of Long Beach, it's important, but you can drive to Long Beach. To get to beaches like this, a lot of them you actually need helicopter support to get people in. Some of our groups do kayak into certain beaches. What we find, discarded fishing boats. This one came over from Japan. Ships' hawsers. I mean, those hawsers are as big around as my arm. Not that my arm is that big, but huge amounts of rope and nets. This is a photo that I took from a helicopter last year. You can just see the amount of containers and buoys. This is off the west coast of Vancouver Island. Those blue bins, by the way, are 55 gallons. They're this tall, just for scale. Tremendous amounts of plastic and styrofoam. This is one beach that we didn't even get to clean up last year. So that was left as it is, and there's lots that look like that. And that's the west coast of Vancouver Island. It looks like a garbage dump. West Coast Trail, the hikers aren't about to hike out all the plastic, so they hang the buoys in trees, and that just gives an idea. At every campsite on the West Coast Trail, you have hundreds and hundreds of buoys hung up in trees. That otter lived, but I did include one photo of an entangled animal. That was on our 2014 cleanup. We came across that sea otter in the middle, entangled in the fishing net. Our volunteers managed to let it go. Some of our volunteers from week 1 last year, we bring in a bunch of volunteers to the north coast of the island, transport them in, provide the food for the week, and they work every day cleaning beaches. So that was our week 1 volunteers last year. And there's our camp in Sea Otter Cove. Once we pick up all the material and consolidate it, in some cases we'll build rafts and float it out to landing barges, such as this one, where it's loaded and then brought to the nearest landfill or recycling facility. But even that truckload is about 600 pounds of plastic. And last year we got a total off the west coast of Vancouver Island of 40 tons. So transport by truck or vehicle is not the most useful. It requires larger vehicles and sometimes, like I said, helicopter support to bring the material out to barges where it's brought down the coast. So that was our barge last year, came right down the coast, west coast of Vancouver Island, collecting from 8 different nonprofit groups, municipalities, and First Nations. So what you can do, last slide. Reduce your use of plastics, really, really important. About 1/3 of the plastic that we came across last year was post-consumer plastic drinking bottles, bleach bottles, and the like. If you're out there crab fishing or the like, take care with your fishing lines and traps. A discarded or lost crab trap will continue to fish indefinitely. And it just continues to catch and kill animals. So discarded or derelict fishing gear is important to take care when you're using it. Spread the word about marine debris and the critical need to clear our coast of these plastics. The Canadian government, despite the fact that we have the longest shoreline in the world, 3 times as long as any other country's coastline, we're one of a few that don't have a plan for cleaning up our coast. Many other countries, India, the US, they have plans to deal with this stuff. Ask your elected representative for support with stable funding. The last 3 years in Canada has been paid for by the Japanese government, which is somewhat shameful as a Canadian that the Japanese government are paying for cleanup of our coast and our government isn't. Volunteer. This is a nice segue. Volunteer with a local shoreline cleanup. There are many that happen. Some of them are close. Long Beach, Spanish Banks. There's one in West Vancouver in a couple of weeks. Or volunteer with Living Oceans for a more remote shoreline cleanup. We also need help with graphic design, working on social media campaigns, and of course our annual beach cleanup to the north coast of the island. With that, I will stick around until the end, and thank you for your patience as I went way over.